reality today. The first thing that we'll start with is just a little bit of a review for part one. We'll talk about what culturally responsive actually is, so that those of you who weren't able to attend part one won't be completely lost in what we're talking about. Culturally responsive course design is very simple. It's just taking into consideration that people come from different cultures, different groups, and that we build that into our course design. And we take account to make things easier for folks who are from different cultures. Now, when I say different cultures, I want to be clear that we're not just talking about race, we're not just talking about ethnicity, we're also talking about the high school culture that the student just came from. Maybe it's a transfer student and they came from another school culture before they came to AUM. Maybe they're a military service member. They came from a very definitive culture, and as a military service member, I know that. And I still, as I present, wear my military on my sleeves very clearly. And that's something that will always be ingrained in me. That is part of my culture. And so we take into consideration culture with each of our students. That military student who might be going to his reserve weekend. We take into account the student who's brand new here that doesn't know anyone yet, and that might feel apprehensive or uncomfortable in the classroom. We think about those things and we make small changes in our classes to make them feel more comfortable. Deficit narrative. When people come from different cultures, we believe that they then have maybe certain deficits that come from that particular culture. And when I say deficit, I mean that maybe they didn't have as many opportunities educationally available to them because they are from a lower socioeconomic status. That would be probably the best example right now. And what we do is we think, oh, well, because they came from this particular group, they already will have some type of deficit that they're going to be struggling against in the classroom. And really all we're doing is we're making assumptions, and we need to be clear that we don't need to be doing that while we're teaching our students. I apologize, my phone is going unprofessional. So we have to be very cautious about deficit narrative and not already putting preconceived notions on our students before we actually start teaching them. Acculturative stress. With the culture change of coming to a new institution, coming to a new campus, there is a certain level of stress that's going to happen. And we have to be sensitive to that and realize that there's going to be these different stressors that are wearing on our students. And we might have to be a little bit more lenient, say, on deadlines, or them attending a class because they have to work, because now they are stuck in a situation where they have to pay bills that they're not accustomed to pay. So we just have to think about those things. And then learned helplessness. With learned helplessness, it's a psychological term. I'm sure that we're all kind of familiar with, I think it's Seligman. I apologize if that's not 100% right. But he did experiments on dogs. The dog would be in a box, and one side of the box had a charge to it and the other side didn't. When the charge went off, the dog would go to the other side of the box. And then when it went off again in that box, he'd go back and forth. And as things went on, the experimenter just put both sides of the box on. And then the dog couldn't go anywhere for safety. So they just gave up and they accepted what was happening to them and accepted their outcome. We have students that have very similar behavior because they've been told that they're lesser. They've been told that they're not capable. They've maybe been ignored. They've been marginalized. They've always been the one person of color in the classroom. And so they've become kind of, they don't have that same level of control over their situation like other students may. And so they've learned helplessness, which can actually manifest into behaviors that we as instructors think of as they don't care, or that they're not paying attention, or they didn't read their syllabus. So we have to be careful and make sure that we're identifying the proper situation. It could be that they've developed this learned helplessness. It's not actually that they're being a bad student. And then we'll talk a little bit more on building community and intentionality in a second. But first, from the part one that we did, a lot of these myths and ideas of what culturally responsive course design came up. And we wanted to kind of talk about those myths and then ask you all if you've heard any other myths that we can dispute or that we can talk about as a group, or we can actually see if it is actually a problem with using this type of, trying to think of the word, a type of experience that we're trying to give our students in the classroom. The first myth is that we are actually going to be decreasing the rigor of our courses because we're using culturally responsive courses on. And in all actuality, we're absolutely not. We're making small changes just to make students feel more comfortable, make them feel more like they belong in our community that we're developing here at AUM. Cultural responsiveness means that one group is getting more attention than the other group. Absolutely not the case. We're not doing this on group by group basis. We're doing this on individual student basis, and we're trying to make the experience work the best for them as possible. The last one is that we're going to be making these significant changes to the curriculum, or we're going to have to make significant changes to how we teach or how we run our courses. And all we're asking and all we're looking to do is just make small little changes. And that's it. Just little course corrections when we realize that somebody might be in a situation where they need a little bit more assistance. Scott, do we have any questions or myths that other people can think of?
Not right now.
How about you guys?
I've heard one, that we are producing students that are not ready for the real world by helping them in class or not properly prepared.
Gotcha. So I will give credit to Melinda Harrison, actually. She brought this up in her section for relational pedagogy, which shares a lot of this. And she brought up that, okay, so we set deadlines for our students and we adhere to those rules in the class because we're preparing them for the workplace. I've not ever worked in a workplace where if I had to be late for something or I had a significant thing happen at home, that I was going to lose my job or that I was any less of a valuable employee because I had these things happen. And so as much as I understand that concept, we're not in the military. You know, this is a higher education, institution, and we are trying to prepare students for the real world. And in the real world, when you tell your boss that something's come up and I've got this emergency, it's going to be okay. We're all humans. So I think that we can reconsider our adherence to those types of deadlines, still making sure that we're not putting ourselves in a spot where we can't get grades turned in at an appropriate time and whatnot. Like, I totally understand that, but we're not doing anything other than just being sensitive to the fact that these students are living contemporary lives with they work, some of them have families, some of them are working on their schoolwork at 3 o'clock in the morning because that's the only time that they have available. So I appreciate you bringing that one up. That was perfect because that is a thing. I think we just all need to kind of reassess our teaching philosophy and what it is that we're trying to teach by setting those deadlines, and is it really relevant in today's world? Anything else? Okay. All right. So we'll move on to some of the benefits of cultural responsiveness in the classroom. And we've already kind of touched on some of these, but we'll just go over them real quick and then we'll move in to some of the steps that you can take in your course to make it more culturally responsive. First one is that it increases your instructional effectiveness. If a student feels more comfortable with you in the classroom and you've taken the time to build rapport, then your instruction is going to be better received. The students are going to pay closer attention to you. They're going to be more motivated to do well in your course. So right out of the gate, you're making your instruction more effective. You're going to decrease the impact of marginalization and acculturative stress. If a student feels like they belong, that they feel like that they're supported, they have rapport with their instructor, then we're going to make them feel more welcome here. The effects of marginalization and that stress that they've been dealing with will definitely be diminished. Cultural responsiveness builds a greater sense of belonging across campus. AUM has its very own culture, and we want our students to feel part of that culture. And so by making it so that it's not inclusion, it's belonging, and I have to give Dr. Burks a pat on the back for that one, that's her verbiage, but we want everybody to be on the same playing field. I'm not including people in with me. I want everybody to be on the same playing field, to have their own norm, so that I belong with them, just the same. It's all equal. So building a community together. Increase student motivation in the learning process. We kind of talked about that. If a student is happy with their instructor and they feel very comfortable in their class with the other students that they're in, they're going to be more motivated to do a better job. We will decrease the need for any type of intensive remediation. If we're paying more attention to building rapport with our students in the front part of the class, and we're realizing the difficulties that they're having earlier on, then come the end of the term, there's not going to be this huge cram to try to get them in the right place. And then lastly, increase the course quality and the curriculum's quality. If we are making our courses better for everybody, we're increasing the value of the courses that we're giving, because we're taking into account everybody, not just one particular group or particular rules that we're trying to follow in that course. Anybody have any comments or thoughts on that? No? Scott? Not you.
Oh, no.
Okay. All right. So before we get started on me telling you some ways to build rapport in your class, I would love to hear some of the ways that you build rapport with your students in your classroom. And I want you to share, because we all have different ideas, and unless we talk about them and share them with everybody, sometimes they just go unseen. And I've learned so much just from my peers and having conversation. So I want you all as peers to kind of talk about it and think of the ways that you have built this community and share. Anybody?
So I definitely learn their names. I use a lot of we language, not you, we. I've been very intentional about removing punitive language from my syllabus. Even when I talk about cheating and plagiarism, I talk about why it's important for them to do their own learning, and that there are consequences to choices, and that that's not something we want to do, but that sometimes you cross that line. But there's a lot of that we language in there. I also share my story, how I got to be where I am. I think it's very important for the students to realize that getting to academia is not a straight line, that we make mistakes, that we also have blemishes on our academic record. And that seems to help as well. I teach sophomores and seniors, and both really benefit from hearing that. I actually teach freshmen too. So they opening that door and humanizing.
So one of the counterpoints that I hear a lot about that point of sharing is that some professors just don't feel comfortable with doing that. Do you have any advice, being that you practice that?
So I think you share the things that you're comfortable with, and I've heard people say, well, I want my students to see me as an authority. They're never not gonna see you as an authority. You're standing up in front of the class, you're using an honorific. Lots of times you present yourself much differently than your students.
Right.
Separating yourself in that way is never an issue. Humanizing yourself and bringing yourself more forward to the students usually is. you don't necessarily have to share all of your story, but enough that you're not this pedestal thing,
Right.
that you're somebody, that your goal is their success. You want everybody to be there. If you could pass everybody, you would, right? And that it's a partnership
Right.
for the
Partnership.
student's success.
Absolutely. Thank you. I know that you just do, and when I say just, I don't
Yeah.
mean just, but I know you do career services.
Yes.
But you are working with students.
And I do go into the classroom
Right.
quite a bit, and I've
There you
also
go.
been a teacher too. I've taught,
Perfect.
so all the things you're talking about, humanizing, that was the word that came into my brain. Because I think that especially working with children, working with adults, right, I start to do that sometimes. But, when they come to me and I'm like, well, have you gone to a professor and talked to them? I think when you do have that element of when teachers are more open with who they are and their experiences. Hello, you learn so much from experiential learning, right? But it also makes them less fearful to come and reach out and, make that connection and ask questions and learn things that they need to learn.
So I have a special question for you. When a student comes into the office to ask help, and your response is, well, have you talked to your professor about da 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 da? Can you tell which professors that student has felt more comfortable with
Oh, yeah.
based on that
definitely.
conversation, if there's an obvious
They will
difference?
just tell me.
Yeah.
I mean, as a chair, I said that too.
Yeah. But and also, just telling your own story is so great. I tend to overshare sometimes. A little too much, probably.
Do you have anything to add?
I think another thing is like care. I think there is a care pathology and you're trying to understand your learners, not from like subject perspectives, but from their life experiences, and you can have some open conversation with your students and to understand what's going on in their real life, and trying to make connections between the subject knowledge with their like life experiences and
So I think for part 3, one of the things that I'm interested in doing, because there's so many versions of pedagogy. You got relational, you got critical care, there's numerous. Maybe it might be poignant to give a little talk on each one of those so that we can see the differences. If you're interested in something like that, when you do your survey for feedback, please let us know, or if there's something else that you think that you might be interested in for part 3, also let us know. Anything on Zoom? No? Good. We're silent? All right. So I think that we've talked about the vast majority of all of these, but I'll just kind of touch on some of my thoughts on them. So my last name is Plimpton. It is not, it's an English name, okay? It's not earth-shattering, but it does and has always frustrated me when people haven't taken the time, especially a professor or a supervisor or whoever, that person of authority took the time to not call me Plumpton or Plankton or Plymouth or any other derivative, because it looks, it's pretty simple, so, and of course, my experience is different, but, for our students who have some names that are, definitely original, it's important to appreciate their identity and to use their name and call them who they are. And it might take a little effort for us to use our mouth in the appropriate way to make those sounds, to make that name the appropriate way, but I think it's a value, and students really appreciate being called by their name. I know some students use an Americanized version of their name, and one of the tricks that I've done, and I think we talked about it last part, is I try to actually learn what their name is as opposed to trying to use the American version. I mean, that might be easier to use that, but I find that students are very appreciative of your effort, at least. For that first week when everybody's coming in and learning their syllabus and what the rules of the class are, I think it's important to also use some of that time to let the students actually get to know each other and build that community inside the classroom. Another thing that came up in Melinda's talk a couple of weeks ago is that she had asked her students to do an assignment where they had to talk with each other. And she noticed that everybody was really quiet and they weren't being effective, they weren't doing anything. And so she asked them, what's going on? Well, we don't know anybody. I'm talking to a stranger and that makes me feel very uncomfortable. Oh, okay. Well, how easy is it for us to put something into our lesson planning that first week where the students can actually get an opportunity to know each other and to build that community? Before you know it, they're studying together, they're rooting each other on, you're developing that team atmosphere within your classroom, which is number 3, develop your team atmosphere. Talk about sharing experiences of yourself, but you can also share experiences of some of your former students with permission, of course. Maybe they were struggling in the course and they used some different tactics to get help. They went to WASC or any of the supportive places that we have on campus to get assistance. That story and letting students know that there was somebody else like them is beneficial. Another good tactic, if you're trying to build rapport with your students, is to find something that you can relate about. For me, I'm an Auburn football fan, so if somebody's an Auburn fan, automatically that's just something that we can relate about. If you're not, I have to work it around and I have to find something else that I can do, which is totally okay. But you can talk about your pets. Another thing is I talk about my dogs constantly. They are my children. And I always have fun stories about things that they did over the weekend or mishaps or funny things, or I show a picture every once in a while. That makes you more human. It makes you a real person that they can have some kind of experience in common with. I also try to find something else about them, a hobby or something that they're interested in that I can ask them about and show interest in. And that I always try to do within that first week or so to get to know everybody. So these are all really easy things to do. These aren't earth-shattering. This is not a complete course overhaul. These are just small steps to start making your classroom a more comfortable community for your students. Just some additional tips. A lot of times we focus on the problems that students are having, but we don't actually focus on the assets. Every student has some kind of a strength. Find out what that strength is and help them focus on it. Show empathy. I've gone through experiences in school that I can use to understand my students better because I've been through the same thing. Share those stories as you feel comfortable with, and that will show that you're being empathetic to the situation that they're in and that you understand what's happening for them. We talked about this a little, Chelsea. Rethink the importance of the rules that you have in your classroom. Rethink your rules and your syllabus. Try not to use punitive language. Think about your tone when you're talking with your students. Think about the tone of your syllabus. Does it sound like you're authoritative and angry, that there's no leeway? Just make small tweaks to make it seem like you're more approachable and that there's just no line in the sand, that maybe there is some flexibility. Ultimately, students just sometimes will need flexibility. You have to help them. If a student has a concern or isn't capable of getting the work in on time, make them feel safe up front by building that rapport so that they feel comfortable coming to you before there's a problem, before it's late, where you can already go ahead and start developing a plan for them and help them to make sure that they're able to finish their work on time or get the help that they need before it's actually due. Be aware of barriers and psychosocial factors. This again just comes from talking to your students and thinking about where they're from. Ask them where they're from. You can kind of put together a little bit of their story, as much as they're going to share, just from asking them where they live, where their family is from. And then you'll be able to kind of determine if there's any social factors that might be affecting their work in the classroom. Having set office hours, I totally understand our time is very valuable, and we want to make sure that if, students need help, that they come during that time. But rethink that set schedule just a little bit, because sometimes students aren't going to be able to come in during those office hours. They might be working. They might have to pick up their kid from school. Any number of different situations could be occurring. So just kind of rethink that just a little bit. Overall, all that culturally responsive course design is about intentionality. And I can't drive that home anymore. If you take the time, you make the effort, you're automatically making improvements in your course. You're already making that class better for folks. So as you go through and you do your planning for your course, plan with some of those differences that you know that students will have in mind. Just think of maybe one additional exercise that you could do that would pull value from the strengths that a particular group of students that have in your class. That might be their number one asset, the thing that they have a strength in. Focus on doing something for them and reflect it into your activities. After every activity, think about what it is that you could have done better. Get feedback from your students. They want to tell you if you've made a safe place for them. If they were not happy about an activity or an exercise that you did, they will be more than happy to say, wow, that was too much, or I didn't like that, or I'm still not understanding what we were doing, whatever it may be, and then go ahead and adjust. If you have that team atmosphere, they'll know that it's okay for them to do that. It's not necessarily that you're running a democracy, but it's that you're valuing their opinion in a together effort for them to learn. So we are never going to be 100%. This is not something where we're going to get it right all the time. But if we've developed a safe place, we've developed a team atmosphere, we've built rapport, we've humanized ourselves, then students are going to be more understanding that you're trying to do the best for them as you possibly can. I like that this little section here, intentionality, on purpose, with a purpose. And just always being purposeful in what it is that you're doing. So I didn't make a bunch of slides because I was supposed to be doing all the talking. There was supposed to be far more people here to engage with. Do we have anybody else who's interested in asking a question?
I will ask if they have any questions.
Thank you guys for participating. I appreciate that. Ms. Amy, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share?
I mean, I appreciate it. This was very, I enjoyed this very much. I love being a part of this training. I will say this semester I had a student who was hearing impaired. He was born without the ability to hear. And so language for this student is much different, having never heard it. And so I have, even though it's a slight difference perhaps, but his culture growing up, not being able to hear, it was different. So I have made the effort to, it's an online class, but I meet with the student one-on-one every week with an interpreter, and I give a lesson to this student. Even though he could do closed caption, he prefers the interpreter. And so I make time, I'm intentional. I think about him when I'm creating assignments. Sometimes we have our students watch a video on YouTube or things of that nature. Well, I can't just put that out there for him. It has to be closed captioned, or we have to have an interpreter. So I can apply this to that, and that it's well worth it. Is it always easy? No, but it's very well worth it.
Yeah, I don't think that any of us got into this job because it was going to be easy. We got into this job because we wanted to teach students and help guide them to the next phase of their life. And so being understanding individuals just makes sense as we move forward. Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that's helpful when you're thinking about designing your course and how you're interacting with your students in your courses, to remember what your goals are.
Mhm.
So we all have learning objectives on our syllabus, and your goal is to teach the student those things. Your goal isn't necessarily to make sure that they're adhering to deadlines or that,
Right.
you know, they're doing X, Y, and Z in this order. And if you can come up with a way to assess your students to ensure that they've met their learning objectives, that's fair and, you know, as equitable as possible, then you've met your goals.
Mhm.
So kind of taking your brain out of the rules and setting it on what you're actually supposed to be doing in that room gives you a lot of freedom and a lot of flexibility in approaching your students. And that, when I started to think of my classes as this is my ultimate goal, I could let go of, yeah, but they didn't do it on time, right?
And that's stressful anyway. I hate that.
It is, and
It's the worst part.
and having everybody turn everything in on time is really nice, because then you have everything graded and
Yes.
standardization, and sometimes you need that. But, you know, within that, you still need to be able to say, to have that one student that's like, you know, my kid was sick and I lost my daycare, and I just can't. It's like, okay. You let me know when you're ready and you turn it in.
What do you think about the professor? There's nobody in particular that I have in mind, but the professor that says, well, I didn't learn that way. And that's their counterpoint.
Well, and it's true. We did not. When we went to school, we were in much stricter, stringent rooms. I remember having classes where it was lecture, and you had 3 exams. I also, sorry, I also went to
You're
a,
just clapping for me. That's perfect. Thank you.
I also went to a private tech school. My school is not this school. Right? The students I went to school with had the same desires as our students, but ultimately came from very privileged families, and our students don't have the privilege that I did. And the way that we understand learning in the past 20 years has changed, and we should adapt to how learning occurs, because we can do it better. We can do it better than the way that we were taught. And the way 20 years ago wasn't necessarily bad, but it wasn't the best.
Yep.
And there's been improvements, and our teaching should reflect the data.
Absolutely.
And you also hear, well, our students
Right.
X, our students Y, which is that deficit thinking that you're
Right, deficit
referencing. And when it comes down to it, we cannot control who walks in our door. We have to meet them exactly where they are, and our job is to teach them. And it doesn't matter who it is, if they've earned the right to step onto this campus, then it is our job to teach them and to do everything we can to get them a diploma.
Absolutely. Yes.
Sorry,
Claps.
my soapbox was my-
I agree.
I agree.
And another point that I'll,
Tell everyone we're done this for a minute.
another point that I want to mention, you know, as we're talking about that, and you talk about like how things have changed. Just think about like technology and how when I was in school playing Oregon Trail, like on the little Tandy, is completely different than the cell phones that we have, where now that is part of their culture, where that's just an accepted thing, that's going to be in their hand most every second, that they can absolutely have it. And they use it not just for communicating, but they learn it for use it for learning. And we are competing as educators with the education they can easily get just by going to YouTube. And
Well, I don't think competing is the right, we have to reframe how we consider ourselves. Because it used to be the instructors were the keeper of knowledge, right? You got your information from your instructor in the textbook, and now all information is accessible to every person.
Right.
So we are no longer sharing information. We are teaching students how to access and analyze it.
absolutely,
So our role has changed.
absolutely it is. And when I
We're
say,
competing for attention, for sure.
Right. When I say compete, I say like compete for ease of use and accessibility, because, you know, if I want to learn something about computers, I can just go onto YouTube, boop, boop, done, spend 15 minutes perusing around and have a pretty good foundation where I can do whatever it is that I'm trying to do, to hack a computer. I don't know, that's my example. Whereas if you come to an actual brick and mortar institution, it might take you the whole 4 years to learn how to that skill set, because we're not learning it in these very usable bites, which is how they learn now. And so we do have to think and adjust, I think, how we teach. You look like you have a comment, I just know it. No? You have anything to add?
No, I just very strongly agree with what Dr. Ward just said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything?
Yes, I do.
Oh, we have a question. Yay.
This is from Sarah Fredericks. It says, we've discussed the importance of being aware of and responsive to students' cultural backgrounds. But we haven't yet addressed how these strategies might play out for people who don't fall into the typical power dynamics in higher ed. For instance, faculty who are women, people of color, etc.
Mhm.
So that's just
It's a good comment. And that's true. And that's something that we can definitely embed, you know, more as we move forward with these different talks and workshop series, whatever you want to call them. And we'll take note of that comment and definitely put it into the mix for part 3, because I think that's important for sure. Anything else?
that's the only thing I see.
No? We already did that. So for part 3, we're still going to do a face-to-face version. We're going to try to see how the Zoom portion worked out and maybe rethink that, or maybe have a separate one. I don't know. I don't want to make any promises. But for part 3, we're going to be doing that April 19th, same room, Taylor 221, same time, noon. As you all should know, I think Shanta sent out the announcement talking about FDI credit. This also counts for FDI credit. And I ask, for those of you who have a piece of paper at your desk, there's a scan code. If you could scan it and do your feedback survey, that would be awesome. And if you want to take some more time, I'm going to actually send out a link via the computer so you can type away and tell me all the goodness of this event, right? Anything else on there?
I do have one more thing.
What you got?
Eric Sterling.
Oh, hey, Dad.
Says,
That's funny.
I think that faculty need to be more flexible about deadlines. Many of our students are struggling not just because of COVID, but also because of family issues, such as very old family members and financial issues. Sorry. When students try to submit a paper late and are told it's too late and they get 0, they sometimes get discouraged and give up and drop the class and lose interest in continuing their education. I think we need to show more compassion and flexibility.
And I would even kind of venture to say that that's probably a behavior that's coming from that learned helplessness that we definitely need to make sure that we're paying more attention to and identifying that that's what it is. It's because they've run into this situation before and they're like, I don't have the effort, the bandwidth, if you will, to do it because I don't have time, or the situation isn't going to go away. I need somebody to help and work with me. So anything else on there, Scott?
No.
All right. So again, I will be sending out an email to all of the participants. I see we have that list ongoing over here, so we'll send you an email. Thank you guys so much for participating. I appreciate it. Thank you, ma'am, for coming. I appreciate your efforts as well. Follow us, please, on social media. Please, we're trying to build it, up. So
Get it together.
I know.
and if you guys have any other questions, please feel free to email us at eec@aum.edu. And thank you for joining us and caring about the subject.
And grab the
Thank you.
candy if you'd like to. off the-
And there's candy for those who are here.
Right, Chuck, did you-
Oh, right, right, yeah.
I think it worked.